On a frozen, deserted highway outside Billings, there were no cars to pass and no witnesses to help. Just falling snow, a single overturned patrol car, and a young female officer bleeding into the white silence. When Ethan stopped, it wasn't because anyone else failed to. It was because no one else was there. What he didn't know was that this was no accident, but a carefully planned erasure. And what the shadows watching from the trees didn't know was that the quiet man kneeling in the snow was a former U.S. Marine, trained to recognize death before it arrives. And the German shepherd at his side had once hunted explosives in war zones. That night, without a weapon or backup, Ethan would step into a fight meant to leave no witnesses, and his choice would expose a truth buried for years. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more stories of courage and faith. Snow fell steadily across the empty highway, thick flakes drifting sideways in the wind, turning the road into a narrow ribbon of white silence. Ethan Cole drove slowly, both hands steady on the wheel of his aging pickup truck. The headlights carved a tunnel through the snow, revealing nothing but asphalt, frozen pines, and darkness beyond. The heater hummed softly. Beside him, Rex lay still in the passenger seat, a full-grown German shepherd with a sable coat streaked in black and tan, his muzzle lightly dusted with gray that hinted at age. At nearly 9 years old, Rex moved less than he once did, but his amber eyes remained sharp, alert even in rest. He was not asleep. He was listening. Ethan was 41, tall and broad-shouldered, with the solid frame of a man who had spent years carrying weight without complaint. His dark hair was cut short, military short, and his beard was trimmed but never styled, more habit than care. A faint scar angled across his jawline, barely visible unless the light caught it right. His face carried a permanent restraint, not coldness, but control, the kind shaped by years of learning when to speak and when silence kept people alive. The Marines had taught him discipline. Loss had taught him distance. He was on his way into Billings, Montana, heading to the small assisted living home where his grandmother waited. She was the last of his family, stubborn, sharp-tongued, and recently ill enough that the doctor had used the word decline. Ethan hated that word. It sounded like surrender. He visited when he could, drove through nights like this because daylight traffic made him restless. Darkness was quieter. Darkness didn't ask questions. His phone buzzed once, then went dead again. No signal. He set it back into the console without frustration. Out here, that was normal. Rex shifted slightly, ears twitching. Then Ethan saw it. A flicker of red and blue ahead, weak and uneven, bleeding through the snowfall. He eased off the gas. The road dipped gently, and as he crested the rise, the scene came into view. A patrol car overturned on its side, roof crushed, one rear tire still spinning slowly, as if confused about gravity. Snow collected on the undercarriage. Steam, or smoke, rose faintly from the hood. Ethan pulled over without thinking. He didn't tell himself to stop. He just did. The moment his boots hit the snow, the cold bit hard. He grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment. Rex was already up, stepping out with him, posture low and deliberate. No leash. Ethan trusted him. Up close, the wreck looked worse. Glass littered the ground like ice crystals. The driver's door was bent inward, metal torn. Ethan's breath slowed, the way it always did when something inside him shifted into a different gear. Then he saw her. She lay several feet from the car, half on her side, half on her back, her body angled unnaturally, as if she'd been placed there rather than thrown. She was small, maybe 5'6", with a slim build that made her look younger than she probably was. Snow clung to her dark blonde hair, which had come loose from a tight regulation bun. Blood matted one side of it, streaking down across pale skin already losing color. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder and soaked red along the abdomen. "Ma'am?" Ethan said calmly, kneeling beside her. His voice did not rise. Panic helped no one. Her eyes fluttered open. They were gray-green, unfocused but aware. Officer Emily Carter, her nameplate read. She couldn't have been more than early 30s. There was something earnest in her face even now, a softness that didn't belong to the violence around her, the kind of face that still believed in rules. Ethan checked her pulse. Weak. Fast. Too fast. This wasn't a rollover, he murmured, mostly to himself. The angle of her body, the damage to the door, it didn't add up. Rex suddenly froze. The dog's ears lifted, rigid. His hackles rose in a slow, deliberate line down his back. A low sound vibrated in his chest. Not a bark, not a growl, but a warning Ethan recognized instantly. Rex wasn't looking at the car. He was looking past it, toward the trees lining the road. Ethan followed his gaze. The forest stood dark and still, snow swallowing sound. But something in Rex's posture told him the quiet was wrong. Emily's fingers twitched. She grabbed Ethan's sleeve with surprising strength. Her grip was cold. "Don't stay," she whispered. Her voice was raw, scraped thin by pain. This wasn't an accident. Ethan met her eyes. Really met them. He saw fear there, yes, but also certainty. The kind that comes from seeing something you weren't meant to see. "I'm here now," he said, firm but gentle. "Just breathe." Rex took one step forward, nose lifted, scenting the air. His body angled slightly, protective, placing himself between Ethan and the tree line without being commanded. Ethan felt it then, the subtle tightening in his chest, the familiar pull of instincts he'd spent years trying to quiet. Whatever had happened here was recent. And whoever had done it hadn't gone far. Snow continued to fall, soft and relentless, covering footprints even as they were made. Rex's growl deepened, and Ethan knew with absolute certainty that they were not alone. Ethan worked quickly but without haste, the way men do when panic has already been burned out of them by worse nights. He slipped on a pair of nitrile gloves from the small medical pouch he kept behind the driver's seat, an old habit he'd never quite shaken, and cut carefully through the torn fabric of Emily Carter's uniform. Snow gathered on his shoulders and beard, melting against the heat of his body, while the wind pressed in from the trees like something curious and unwelcome. Emily lay still, her breathing shallow, each inhale rattling as if her lungs were unsure they wanted to keep going. Up close, she looked younger than Ethan had first thought. Early 30s, maybe 32. Slim, athletic in the quiet way that came from long hours of training rather than the gym. Her skin was pale beneath the blood loss, freckles scattered faintly across her cheeks and nose. Her hair, dark blonde, almost ash brown, had come completely undone now, strands frozen against her temples. Even in pain, there was something steady about her expression. She was scared, yes, but not broken, the kind of woman who had learned to hold herself together because no one else would do it for her. "Stay with me," Ethan said softly as he applied pressure to the wound at her abdomen. It wasn't clean, too jagged. Not the kind of injury a seatbelt alone caused. "You're bleeding, but you're still here. That matters." Emily swallowed hard. Her eyes focused on his face, then flicked briefly to Rex, who stood a few feet away, rigid and alert, his nose testing the air again and again. The German shepherd's posture hadn't relaxed since Chapter 1. If anything, the tension in him had sharpened. His tail was low, muscles coiled, every instinct screaming that this place was wrong. Rex was nearly 9, older now, his movements measured, but his senses had lost none of their edge. Years as a canine had carved vigilance into his bones. "You're not Highway patrol, Emily rasped. No, Ethan replied. Just someone who stopped. She gave a faint, humorless breath that might have been a laugh. Figures. He reached into his kit and pulled out gauze, packing it carefully, firmly, watching her face for signs she was slipping too far away. The snow fell heavier now, thick enough to soften the world into a dim, white tunnel. Somewhere beyond the trees, the wind carried a low moan, almost like distant traffic, though Ethan knew better. This road hadn't seen another car in a long time. I was following a lead, Emily said, her voice uneven. Narcotics. Small at first. Too small. I didn't call it in. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't scold. He'd seen too many young officers make that choice, believing initiative alone would protect them. Why not? Because someone's been leaking, she said. Her fingers twitched weakly against the snow. Every time backup showed up, the suspects were already gone. I needed to know who I could trust. That explained the isolation. It didn't excuse it, but it explained it. Ethan glanced toward the patrol car. The angle of the wreck still bothered him. He stood briefly, scanning the ground with his flashlight. The beam cut through falling snow, revealing dark lines in the white. Tire marks. Not random. 2 long, deliberate arcs where rubber had fought ice. Your car didn't just lose control, he said quietly. Emily followed his gaze. Her eyes narrowed despite the pain. They pushed me. Ethan crouched lower, tracing the tracks with the light. The skid marks angled inward, tight and aggressive, like a hunter forcing prey where it wanted it to go. And there, half buried now, were boot prints. Larger than hers. Heavy tread. At least 2 different patterns. These aren't yours, he said. No, she whispered. I never got out. The smell hit him then. Sharp, metallic, gasoline. It stung the back of his throat. Ethan turned slowly toward the patrol car. Snow and steam mixed around the hood, but beneath it all, the scent was unmistakable. Rex growled again, deeper this time, and took a step back from the vehicle, eyes never leaving the dark tree line. He didn't bark. He didn't need to. Ethan trusted that sound more than any alarm. We can't stay here, Ethan said. He pulled his phone from his pocket and checked it again. 1 bar flickered, then vanished. No signal. Nothing. I'm going to get you out, but I need you awake. Emily's breathing hitched. Her gaze drifted toward the overturned car, something flickering behind her eyes, memory surfacing through shock. I heard metal, she said slowly, as if testing the words. After they hit me. The car spun, and before it rolled, I heard the trunk, the latch. It opened. Ethan froze for half a second. They opened your trunk, he repeated. She nodded weakly. I thought maybe it was coming loose, but then I smelled gas, and I knew. Knew what he was thinking now, that whatever had been done here wasn't just meant to stop her. It was meant to erase her. The wind shifted. Snow swirled harder. Rex suddenly turned his head sharply to the right, ears locked, body angled again between Ethan and the forest. His nose lifted high, scenting something new, or something that hadn't faded yet. Ethan felt the weight of that realization settle in his chest. This wasn't an accident. It hadn't been reckless driving or bad weather. It was deliberate, controlled, and recent. He looked down at Emily, who was fighting to keep her eyes open. Listen to me, he said, his voice steady, grounding. We're leaving this spot, right now. She managed a small nod. Her fingers curled faintly into the sleeve of his jacket, as if anchoring herself to the only solid thing left. Behind them, the patrol car creaked softly as snow piled against twisted metal. And somewhere beyond the trees, the silence felt less empty than it should have been. Ethan did not debate the decision. He simply made it. Years ago, someone had taught him that hesitation killed faster than bullets, and that lesson returned now with brutal clarity. The smell of gasoline had grown sharper, biting through the cold air, and the overturned patrol car gave off a faint ticking sound as metal cooled and shifted under stress. Snow piled against the wreck, muffling its shape, disguising danger beneath a clean white surface. Ethan crouched beside Emily Carter and slid one arm beneath her shoulders, testing her weight carefully, listening to her breathing, watching her pupils for signs she was slipping too far away. Emily was trembling, her body fighting both blood loss and cold. Her skin had taken on a grayish cast, freckles standing out more starkly across her cheeks. Her lips were pale, but her eyes still tracked his face, searching it, measuring him the way cops did when they needed to know if someone would break under pressure. "If you're going to move me," she whispered, voice barely audible over the wind, "do it now." "I am," Ethan replied. He stripped off his jacket, wrapping it around her torso as best he could before lifting. His movements were precise, economical, careful not to jar the wound he'd packed moments earlier. He had carried wounded men like this before, men heavier than Emily, men screaming louder, but the memory of that weight had never left his muscles. Rex pressed in close, his flank brushing Ethan's leg as if to steady both of them. The dog's ears flicked constantly, tracking sounds beyond human hearing, his body angled outward, guarding their blind side. Ethan stepped away from the car, boots crunching into snow. He had taken no more than 6 paces when the world behind them exploded. The blast tore through the night with a violent roar, heat slamming into Ethan's back as if a giant hand had struck him. The patrol car erupted into flame, the underside bursting outward, sending shards of metal spinning through the air like scythes. Glass rained down in a storm of lethal glitter. The concussion knocked the breath from Ethan's lungs and threw him forward. He twisted instinctively, turning his body so that Emily was shielded as much as possible, and hit the ground hard, rolling once before coming to a stop. For a moment there was nothing but sound and light. Fire blossomed against the falling snow, orange and furious, painting the trees in violent shadows. The heat melted flakes before they could land, turning snow to steam in hissing bursts. Somewhere nearby, metal clanged and settled, the wreckage of the patrol car collapsing in on itself like a dying animal. Rex was already there. The German shepherd skidded to a stop beside them, teeth bared, a low, savage growl vibrating through his chest. His coat was dusted with ash and snow, eyes locked on the burning wreck as if expecting something, or someone, to rise from it. Ethan forced air back into his lungs and pushed himself up onto one knee, checking Emily with quick, practiced hands. She was alive, but barely. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused, and a thin line of blood crept from the corner of her mouth. "That wasn't supposed to happen," she murmured. Her voice sounded distant, as if it were coming from underwater. Ethan tightened his grip. "Stay with me," he said again, though now the words carried more urgency. He looked back at the fire. This wasn't an accident. No fuel line rupture caused that kind of explosion, not without help. Whatever had been placed in that trunk had done exactly what it was meant to do. They couldn't stay where they were. Firelight made them visible for miles, and if someone had gone to the trouble of turning a traffic stop into an incinerator, they wouldn't hesitate to finish the job. Ethan rose, lifting Emily into a fireman's carry across his shoulders. She weighed less than he expected, and that scared him more than anything else. Rex moved ahead this time, circling back every few steps, checking the darkness, ensuring the path was clear. They pushed deeper into the snow, away from the road, away from the burning car. Shrapnel continued to fall around them, embedding itself in tree trunks with dull thuds. Ethan staggered once, caught himself, and kept going. Each step burned in his thighs, old injuries screaming in protest, but he ignored them. Pain was familiar. Pain could wait. Emily stirred against his shoulder, her breath shallow and uneven. "They didn't just want me dead," she said suddenly, the words slurring together as consciousness slipped. "They wanted no witnesses, no car, no report." She coughed weakly, then laughed once, a sound without humor. "Erase it all." Ethan said nothing. He didn't need to. He understood exactly what that meant. Her grip on his jacket tightened briefly, fingers digging in as if anchoring herself to the present. "Promise me," she whispered. "Don't let it end like this." "I won't," he said. And he meant it. Not as a vow to her alone, but to something older, something that had followed him long after he'd left the Marines. The belief that some lines didn't move, no matter how dark the road became. They reached a shallow dip between the trees, the fire now partially hidden behind a rise of land. The light dimmed, replaced by the relentless gray of snow and night. Rex stopped, standing watch, his chest heaving, breath steaming in the cold. Ethan lowered Emily carefully onto the ground, checking her pulse again. It was still there, weak but present. Her eyes opened one last time, struggling to focus. She looked at him as if trying to memorize his face. "They're careful," she said. "They clean up after themselves." Her voice faded, strength draining fast. "This wasn't about me." Then her eyes rolled back, and she went limp. Ethan closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, steadying himself, then reached for his medical kit again. Behind them, the fire crackled on, consuming what remained of the patrol car, and the snow kept falling, determined to bury every trace of what had happened. But Ethan knew better now. Someone had wanted this night erased, and he had no intention of letting that happen. The ambulance cut through the snow with sirens muted by the storm, red lights bleeding across white streets as Billings General Hospital rose out of the night like a concrete island. Ethan rode in the front seat this time, Rex secured calmly in the back, the dog's chest rising and falling in a controlled rhythm that mirrored Ethan's own breathing. Behind them, Emily Carter lay unconscious, monitors ticking softly, her life reduced to numbers and steady beeps. Inside the emergency bay, the air smelled of antiseptic and warm metal. Nurses moved with practiced urgency, coats pulled tight over scrubs as they wheeled Emily inside. A trauma physician stepped forward, a man in his early 50s, tall and lean, with sharp cheekbones and steel gray hair cropped close to his scalp. His name badge read Dr. Thomas Keene. Years in emergency medicine had carved patience into his face, but his eyes were quick, missing nothing. "She's hypothermic and bleeding internally," Keene said, scanning Emily's vitals. Then he paused, fingers brushing the field dressing at her abdomen. His brows drew together. "Who packed this wound?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "I did." Keene looked up at him then, really looked. At the posture, the calm hands, the absence of tremor. "This is clean work," he said quietly. "Not textbook, but effective. You stopped a bleed that would have killed her in minutes." "I did what I could," Ethan replied. He didn't add more. As Emily was rushed into surgery, the waiting area swallowed the noise. Snow tapped softly against the glass walls. Rex lay at Ethan's feet, head up, eyes scanning every movement. A nurse approached briefly, glancing at the dog with mild surprise before smiling. "He's calm," she said. "Better behaved than most people." "He's trained," Ethan answered. That was when Captain Robert Hayes arrived. Hayes was in his late 50s, tall but slightly stooped, the weight of years in law enforcement showing in his shoulders. His hair was thinning and iron gray, his mustache neatly trimmed in a style that hadn't changed since the 90s. His face carried lines that came not from anger, but from disappointment. Cases that never closed, officers he couldn't save. When he spoke, it was with measured authority, the kind that didn't need to be raised. "You the one who brought Officer Carter in?" Hayes asked. "Yes, sir." Hayes nodded once. "I'm Robert Hayes, Captain." He extended a hand. Ethan shook it firmly, neither too tight nor too loose. They talked near the windows, voices low. Hayes asked what had happened. Ethan told him the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. The overturned car, the injuries, the explosion. He didn't speculate, he didn't accuse, he described. "And the dog?" Hayes asked, glancing down at Rex. "Rex." "Former canine. He's retired." Rex lifted his head at his name, ears forward, then settled again. Calm, observant. "Figures," Hayes murmured. "He didn't spook once." Across the room, a woman leaned against a column, watching them with quiet intensity. Detective Laura Mitchell was younger than Hayes, mid-30s, with sharp brown eyes and dark hair pulled into a low, practical ponytail. She wore a long wool coat over plain clothes, her stance relaxed but alert. There was a scar along her left eyebrow, thin and pale, the kind that came from a mistake you never repeated. She had the look of someone who listened more than she spoke. She approached after Hayes stepped away to take a call. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I'm Detective Mitchell." Ethan inclined his head. "Detective, you stayed calm out there," she said. "Not a question." "Most civilians don't." "I've had practice," Ethan replied. "Doing what?" "Handling pressure." Mitchell studied him. His posture didn't shift. His gaze didn't wander. "You didn't panic," she continued. "You moved her before the explosion. You shielded her. You applied trauma care under stress. Those aren't instincts people pick up accidentally." Ethan met her eyes. "You asked me what happened." "I told you." She nodded slowly. "You did, and Officer Carter confirmed you saved her life." She paused, then added, "Right now there's no reason to hold you, no evidence of wrongdoing. You're free to go." Ethan felt the tension ease just slightly in his chest. Not relief, something quieter. Acceptance. A nurse emerged an hour later. "She's stable," she said. "Surgery went well. She's alive because of what you did." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, absorbing that. Rex let out a low breath, tail thumping once against the floor. Before Ethan left, Mitchell stopped him again. "One more thing," she said. "Mind if I ask where you learned emergency medicine like that?" Ethan considered. "The Marines." Her eyes sharpened just a fraction. "What unit?" "Infantry," he said simply. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Later, alone in his truck, snow still falling, Ethan checked his phone. 1 bar now. A missed call from the assisted living home. He started the engine, Rex climbing into the passenger seat as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Inside the hospital, Detective Mitchell stood at a terminal, pulling records. Ethan Cole. Discharged U.S. Marine. Honorably. No flags, no incidents, no follow-up. Too clean. She frowned slightly, saving the file. Clean, she thought, didn't always mean simple. The snow did not stop after the fire. It settled over Billings in a heavy, patient silence, as if the city itself were waiting to see what would be uncovered once the smoke cleared. In the days that followed, the burned-out patrol car was hauled away under tarps, its twisted frame reduced to evidence tags and photographs. Investigators worked methodically, peeling back layers of melted plastic and scorched steel, and what they found confirmed what Ethan had already known in his bones. The explosion had been deliberate. An incendiary device, compact and efficient, had been planted in the trunk and designed to ignite once the vehicle rolled. Whoever had done it hadn't panicked. They had planned it. Detective Laura Mitchell stood in the evidence room late one evening, her coat draped over the back of a chair, sleeves rolled up. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, she looked more tired than she ever allowed herself to appear in public. Her dark hair had slipped loose from its tie, framing a face defined by sharp angles and an intensity that rarely softened. Mitchell wasn't driven by ambition. She was driven by unfinished things. Years earlier, a partner had been wounded in an ambush she'd failed to anticipate. He survived, but the memory had shaped her into someone who trusted patterns more than promises. She stared at the screen in front of her, files layered side by side. One belonged to Officer Emily Carter. The other, newly opened, belonged to Ethan Cole. At first glance, Ethan's record was unremarkable. U.S. Marine Corps, honorable discharge, no disciplinary flags. But as Mitchell dug deeper, connections began to surface, not in the open, but in the margins. A name in an old report. A location that repeated itself. And then, finally, a sealed case file that made her sit back slowly in her chair. Anna Cole, Ethan's wife. The photo showed a woman in her early 30s, tall and slender, with chestnut brown hair worn in a practical cut just below the jaw. Her skin was fair, her expression serious but kind, the kind of face that suggested both resolve and empathy. She had worked in federal law enforcement, specializing in interagency task forces, quiet roles that rarely made headlines. 6 years earlier, she had been killed during an investigation involving narcotics trafficking. Official cause? Operational failure during a routine operation. Case closed. No suspects. Mitchell's jaw tightened. The trafficking network tied to Anna Cole's death shared overlapping routes, names, and logistics with the one now operating near Billings. Across town, Ethan sat beside his grandmother's bed, the room warm and dim, curtains drawn against the snow. Margaret Cole was a small woman now, her once straight posture softened by age. Her white hair was thin and neatly brushed, her hands fragile, but still stubbornly strong when they clasped his. She had raised Ethan after his parents died, instilling in him a quiet sense of responsibility that no uniform had ever given him. "You look tired," she said, her voice papery but sharp. "Just a long night," Ethan replied. He didn't mention the fire. He didn't mention the questions. He had promised himself that this part of his life would never cross into hers. Later that evening, Captain Robert Hayes stood outside Ethan's truck as snow gathered on his shoulders. Hayes removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair and a deeply lined forehead. He looked older than he had at the hospital, the weight of command pressing harder now. "I won't waste your time," Hayes said. "We confirmed the explosion was intentional. Whoever did it knew what they were doing." Ethan nodded once. "I figured." Hayes hesitated, then continued. "Detective Mitchell uncovered something. Your wife, Anna. She was killed working a case tied to the same network Officer Carter stumbled into." Ethan didn't react outwardly, but something tightened behind his ribs. He had spent years not looking at that truth too closely. "What are you saying, Captain?" "I'm saying this isn't coincidence." Hayes's voice was steady, not accusatory. "And I'm asking, not ordering, if you'd consider helping us." "Doing what?" Ethan asked, though he already knew. "Training," Hayes said. "Tactical medical response, scene awareness, how to spot an ambush before it becomes one. You wouldn't go into the field. You wouldn't carry a weapon." Ethan looked down at Rex, who sat beside him, ears flicking at distant sounds. The dog's muzzle had gone gray around the edges, age catching up at last, but his posture was still protective, still vigilant. Rex had followed Ethan out of one life and into another without complaint. "I can't," Ethan said quietly. Hayes didn't argue. "Because of your grandmother?" "Because of everything," Ethan replied. "I didn't walk away because I was weak. I walked away because I knew what staying would cost." Hayes studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I respect that. He turned to leave, then paused. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. The call came the next night. A young officer, Daniel Ruiz, 24, fresh out of the academy, lean and eager, had nearly died responding to a suspicious vehicle on the outskirts of town. He'd approached from the wrong angle, failed to scan the tree line. The ambush had been textbook. Only luck and a delayed detonator had saved him. Ethan heard about it on the police scanner, the clipped voices carrying urgency and fear. He closed his eyes as the details came in. He had seen that setup before. He had warned about it. Rex lifted his head, sensing the shift in Ethan's breathing. The past did not knock. It stepped inside and sat down. Ethan agreed at dawn, the kind of dawn that never truly brightened the sky, only thinned the darkness into a pale gray veil. Snow drifted across the training yard behind the Billings police annex, muffling sound and turning breath into fog. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, shoulders squared, posture straight without trying. He had left his sidearm at home. He owned none anymore, and the absence felt deliberate, a boundary he refused to cross. Captain Robert Hayes watched from the steps, arms folded inside his heavy parka. The captain's face was set, jaw tight beneath the gray mustache. He had slept little since the ambush on the young officer. Guilt clung to him like frost. "You'll be advising only," Hayes said. "No field entry. No weapons." "I'm here to keep people alive," Ethan replied. "That's the job." The first session began in a converted garage. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A dozen officers gathered, some seasoned, some still carrying the stiffness of the academy. Ethan spoke plainly. He taught them how bleeding actually killed. Not dramatically, but quietly. He showed them how to pack a wound with purpose, how pressure was not a suggestion. He demonstrated angles, where to stand, where not to stand, how eyes should move before feet did. He spoke about ambush not as a theory, but as a pattern, a rhythm. His voice never rose. It didn't need to. People leaned in anyway. Rex lay near the open door, old discipline holding him steady. His coat was thick against the cold, muzzle gray now, eyes alert but calm. When officers passed too close without noticing the doorway, Rex's ears flicked, and Ethan corrected the line of sight without looking back. "Doorways kill," Ethan said once. "They don't have to." By the third day, Emily Carter returned to the building. She moved carefully, still pale, still thin from blood loss, her dark blonde hair pulled into a low knot that left her face open and honest. The freckles on her cheeks stood out more now. Her eyes were sharper, though, focused with the clarity that came after surviving something meant to erase you. She stood straight despite the pain, shoulders set, the stubbornness of someone who refused to be defined by the worst night of her life. "I remembered something," she told Ethan and Hayes in a quiet office that smelled faintly of coffee and paper. She laid out a map, her fingers steady. "A warehouse, off Riverbend Road." "It wasn't on my original report because it didn't fit. Too clean, too quiet. But that's why it matters." Night fell hard again, snow thickening into sheets that erased distance. The operation moved without sirens, without hurry. Ethan remained in the command vehicle, a map on his knees, radio crackling softly. He listened. He watched feeds. He traced routes with a finger, feeling the familiar tension settle into his shoulders. This was standing without a weapon, choosing restraint, not retreat. "Rear exit?" Hayes asked. "Likely," Ethan said. "And likely trapped. They plan for panic." Rex lifted his head, nose testing the air even inside the vehicle. He shifted, a low sound in his chest. Not alarm, but notice. Teams moved in. Snow swallowed their footsteps. Inside the warehouse, shadows stacked high among crates. The radio carried breath and code words. Then, a pause. "Hold," Ethan said. "Don't push." A runner broke for the back, exactly as predicted. Ethan's voice stayed level. "Freeze. Back away from the door." A wire glinted on the camera feed, thin, patient, waiting. A pressure switch hidden where a hand would naturally land. Rex rose, pawing once at the floor, nose angled toward the building. "Explosives," Ethan said. "Low yield, enough to maim." They disarmed it. No blast, no screams. Just breath returning to lungs that had tightened without knowing why. Inside a locked office, they found files, shipping manifests, burner phones, photographs sealed in plastic. One image stopped Ethan cold. A woman in a federal jacket, chestnut hair cut to the jaw, eyes steady. Anna Cole, his wife. The timestamp burned brighter than the rest. "It wasn't an accident," Hayes said quietly, standing beside him. "Not an accusation. A truth finally given a name." Ethan closed his eyes for a beat. The snow outside fell on, indifferent. When he opened them, the weight had shifted. Not gone, but placed where it belonged. The warehouse emptied under custody lights, not fire. Officers walked out whole. Emily leaned against a crate, breathing through the ache, meeting Ethan's gaze with a nod that said she understood the cost of choosing to stay. Rex sat at Ethan's heel, tail still, watchful. The night exhaled. And for the first time since the fire, Ethan felt the ground beneath him hold. Snow returned to Billings as it always did, without drama, without witnesses. Soft flakes settling on rooftops and sidewalks, as if nothing violent had ever torn the night open. The warehouse was empty now, lights off, doors sealed, its secrets catalogued and removed. The network that had hidden behind routine routes and careful silences was dismantled piece by piece. No officers were killed. That mattered most. The city breathed again. Emily Carter stood at the edge of the parking lot outside the station, her coat pulled tight against the cold. Recovery had thinned her frame, but it hadn't diminished her presence. She was tall enough to meet most men eye to eye, with a runner's build that hinted at discipline rather than vanity. Her hair, dark blonde and newly cut shorter than before, framed a face that looked older now, not worn, but sharpened. Survival had done that. She spoke less, listened more. When she smiled, it was deliberate. She watched Ethan load a box into the back of his truck and nodded once. "They closed it," she said. "Your wife's case, officially." Ethan paused, hands resting on the tailgate. The words landed without impact at first, like snow on a jacket. Then warmth followed, relief, quiet and unfamiliar. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. The truth had been found, and that was enough. "Thank you," he said, meaning more than the words could carry. Captain Robert Hayes watched from the steps, his posture easier than it had been in weeks. The lines on his face remained, but something behind them had softened. He offered Ethan a hand. "If you ever change your mind," he said, the sentence left open on purpose. Ethan shook his head gently. This was always temporary. They understood each other. Some missions ended not with medals, but with doors closing the right way. Weeks passed. Winter held, then loosened its grip just enough to remind the city that seasons moved on, whether people did or not. Ethan did not return to the annex. He did not answer calls about consulting contracts. Instead, he rented a small room above a community center on the south side of town. Clean, bright, unremarkable. He painted the walls himself. He set up folding tables. He printed flyers in plain, black ink. First response basics, open to all. On the first night, 12 people came. A school teacher with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers. a truck driver whose hands shook when he talked about icy roads, a grocery clerk with a limp from an old fall. Ethan stood at the front, hands loose at his sides, and spoke about bleeding, about pressure, about breath. He showed them how to use what they had, belts, shirts, calm voices. He corrected without shaming. He repeated without impatience. Rex lay by the door, as he always did. Age had rounded his movements, softened the sharpness of youth, but his coat still gleamed under the lights, sable fur catching gold at the edges. He was content there, chin on paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. When people entered, he watched. When they left, he watched. The class learned quickly that if Rex stood, they paid attention. After class, a woman lingered. Martha Green, late 60s, small and stooped, with silver hair pulled into a tidy bun, and hands that trembled only when she spoke about the night her husband collapsed in the driveway. "I froze," she said. "I didn't know what to do." Ethan nodded, his voice gentle. "You're here now," he said. "That counts." News spread quietly. The second week brought more chairs. The third week filled them. Ethan never advertised beyond the flyers. He never spoke about his past unless asked, and even then he chose his words with care. He taught skills, not stories. One evening, as snow fell light and steady, Ethan locked up and walked to his truck. Rex jumped into the passenger seat with a practiced ease, turning once before settling. The engine started on the first try. The road home was familiar now, the same highway that had once carried him into fire. He drove slower than before, not from fear, but from attention. Snow brushed the windshield. The town lights blurred softly at the edges. At a stoplight, Ethan rested his hands on the wheel and let the quiet sit. The past was still there, he knew that. Anna's face would always rise unbidden at odd moments. The sound of the explosion would never fully fade. But the weight no longer pressed him forward or held him back. It stayed where it belonged. The light turned green. He drove on. At home, Rex trotted inside, tail tapping once against the doorframe. Ethan set his keys down, shrugged off his coat, and stood for a moment, listening to the hum of the heater. Outside, snow kept falling, patient and clean. Inside, there was space. Not empty, just open. He did not wear a uniform. He did not carry a weapon. He did not need to run anymore. The mission was quiet now, measured in hands that knew what to do and people who went home breathing. That was enough. That had always been enough. Sometimes the miracle is not fire from the sky, but a hand that does not turn away. Sometimes God does not stop the storm. He sends someone willing to stand in it. A stranger who stops on a dark road. A heart that chooses courage over fear. A quiet act that saves a life and changes many more. In our daily lives, we may never face explosions or flashing lights, but we face moments that ask the same question. Will we walk past, or will we help? If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so more stories of faith, courage, and redemption can reach the world. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, and guide your steps through every storm. Amen.